Welcome everyone to our second webinar on racism, the struggle and debate in the world. Today, with a view about Brazil, India, and Ethiopia. It's a pleasure to have you here today, guys, and I'm so happy to do this space with you, and I appreciate your time, attention to be here today and to be able to discuss this important fight around the world on behalf of all my animal, the name Brazil. So, how this space will work? We'll start with Brazil, then with India, and to close the webinar, Ethiopia. At the end of this meeting, we will share with you Aemon and Purva some questions that were sent from our medical students. And for just a kind reminder, questions will be accepted only in English. So in the video description, we have a Google Forms, and you can um, fill in and put your inputs or questions about the webinar. And also, don't forget to subscribe this Google form and attention to the forms about certification. So I'm going to start the presentation with an overview about racism in Brazil, and I will share this presentation with you, and my colleague Victoria will be here today to be a presenter with me. So I will now share my screen. So just a minute, guys, please. Victoria, could you tell me if you are seeing my screen?
Yes, it's perfect.
So the our presentation is about racism, the struggle and debate in a view about the Brazilian way of racism. My name is Caio, and I'm the national assistant for this term. And the other presenter with me is Victoria, animal president for the NEM on this term. So, what is racism? Racism is a system of oppression that denies opportunities based on a set of theories and beliefs that establish a hierarchy between races on, or ethnic groups. In Brazil, this system has been designed since the foundation of the country with the arrival of the Portuguese colonizers. So when we talk about racism in Brazil, um, so when we talk about racism in Brazil, we are talking and considering the black population, and it's important to know that the indigenous population is also a target of this system of oppression. So in Brazil, the racism is not only about a matter about black population, but also it's about the indigenous population. So the indigenous people suffer historically from attacks on their culture, language, religion, and even in their self-declaration of their identities. So these were perpetuated and was perpetuated by the construction of a society that is responsible for the historical erasure of these oppressions. So the colonizers, the Portuguese colonizers, when they arrived here, they arrived to extract and plunder all the rights that is this land could offer. This includes indigenous laborers that has been compulsorily used for years, and therefore it is it is fundamental to understand and recognize the place that the indigenous people occupy with their tradition and their customs in order to combat racism and eliminate stereotypes. So I bring here today a citation. It's in Portuguese, but I will read this in Portuguese because there are terms used in here that we cannot translate to English, such as Indios and tribos. So I try to explain what she is trying. After I read this in Portuguese, I try to explain what she is saying in English. So I'm going to read right now. So it's é muito comum ouvirmos os termos índios e tribos. Esses termos apagam a nossa pluralidade. Eu não sou índia, sou teneterrária e me sinto ofendida quando me chamam de índia. Isso demonstra que quem fala só conhece a visão romântica de um índio que não existe e nunca existiu. So this phrase was said by Juliana Guajajara, an indigenous activism, and so she's trying to say that racism in the indigenous people is more than a discrimination. It's a tentative to erase their culture, like I said, their language and their particularities. So they're trying to minimize their indigenous people as one group, but have a large plurality on their culture. So she's trying to say this in this phrase. So and what about racism and black population? So what are the historical foundations of racism in Brazil? So we have five pillars, five fundamental pillars, not just five pillars, but we have these five ones as crucial and fundamental when we are talking about racism in Brazil. So we have the slave hindrances with so we can see this today as certain forms of work, such as domestic workers, who are mostly black women. So we have the segregation and non-incorporation, and it's after the signing of the law that abolished slavery in Brazil in May 1888. So were not created as state policies that aim to insert black peoples into the social structure, further naturalizing inequality. So since the even with the abolition of the slavery, they have no state policies that include black people as part of the society and part of the how society works in, here in Brazil. So it has some laws of the republic, the new republic, when when Brazil became a republic. So we have some laws that such as immigration law in 1890 that that mm, how can I say that uh, which prevents the immigration of Africans and Asians to the country, favorizing the European immigration here to Brazil, such as Germany people and Italian ones. So that was a movement very important to the Brazilian history. So we have also the spatial segregation, that appearance of the structures of in Portuguese we call it as cortiços, that the the structure that at the end that surged at the end of 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, and comes this social structure and spatial structure becomes to comes to delimit the space in which black people must be inserted. So, and as one of the most important social racism pillars in Brazil, we have the racial theories. We have two most important racial theories, such as population whitening and racial democracy, and that was very important. It is very important to understand how the racism is structured, and it's a how can I say, it's a state policy in Brazil. So it's very important to understand how the slavery process is directly linked to racism in Brazil. And the slavery of the black population in the country began with the slave trade in 1550. And we have such a psychoanalyst called Neuza Santos. She is author of a book called in English Become Black, in Portuguese Tornar-se Negro, that brings in that society by transforming the African into slave market the place of the black people, the way to treat and to be treated, creating a parallelism between black color and having inferior social position. So in addition to that, it's also necessary to understand that Brazil uh, has some great difference between other experience in history, such as racial segregation in the USA and the apartheid regime in South Africa. So these two regimes in which in which racism was supported by government policies. These are different, fundamental to understand how in Brazil there is an awareness that racism is less frequent. So here in the the fact we are not passing by the history for a regime of segregation of or the existence of um, po- state policies that naturalize racism. It's favoring the awareness that racism is less frequent in the country. So, for to finish my presentation, it's very important to understand also the intellectual elite of the country was responsible for spreading the idea of the existence of a racial democracy. That is that is what is this racial democracy that is in Brazil. The racial conflicts were overcome by the harmonious coexistence between blacks and whites. And this idea is nothing more than a myth, an allegory that was created to sustain the social pillars and favor the inequalities that exist here in the country. So, Victoria, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much for this first presentation, Kyle. So I am going to talk more about the vision of Brazilian races when we're talking about the impacts of COVID-19 within the country and other structures of society, such as access to education, health, and labor market in Brazil. So, first of all, it's important to say that racism in Brazil is a crime. The Brazilian law 7716 defines produces of race or color as crimes without bail and imprescriptibility. In addition of this, we have two symbolic national dates inside Brazil to remember the Black struggles, such as May 13 was declared the day of the abolition of slavery in Brazil. And we have November 20, the day of Black conscience in Brazil. And for us, we consider these dates an advancement on the agenda about the racism discusses, but are often not respected yet inside my country. Um, so we have in Brazil more than 200 million Brazilians, and only a little percentage of 1% is the richest of the Brazilian population, and they hold 49% for all the country's wealth. So, like this concentration of income shows the high racial inequality in the country. In addition of this, we have almost 60% of the Brazilian population declared Black. These numbers are more than 100 million of Brazilians. The superiority in numbers, like these numbers, however, is not yet reflected in Brazilian society, unfortunately. But the first time the Blacks are the majority in Brazil public higher education. They are still a minority in leadership positions in the labor market and among uh, the political, in the legislature and judiciary. And in addition of these two, just as only 3% of medical students are Black graduated every year in Brazil. These numbers is so, oh, sorry. So the Black population is also a tiny part of the Brazilian judiciary, and among those who are employed or underemployed in Brazil, Blacks are the majority too in this topic. They are also the largest part of homicide victims in Brazil and make up more than 60% of the country's prison population. These numbers is a serious numbers for us in Brazil. And we can, the next one, please, Kyle. So, thus now talking more about the impacts of COVID-19, it's absolutely crucial to understand that the Black people, the indigenous people, and the poor people are the most affected by this bad Brazilian reality in the midst of this pandemic. We have the worst president in Brazil and in the world against COVID-19 by Washington Post. You can see this image by Washington Post. This is Bolsonaro's president Brazil. And this fact brings a brutal impact to our country at a national and international level, as the new government has conservative ideas and doesn't have the knowledge about the culture, the people, and the history of Brazil. So, inside the Americas region, we have some critical areas such as Brazil and Ecuador, and the pandemic inside the Americas regions uh, only shows how important health is for people who live in poor condition or who do not have the public health that works well at times like this. So for us is so in Brazil is not different. The COVID-19 has two faces for us. One of them, we have our unified health system, called in Portuguese Sistema Único de Saúde, SUS, which serves the entire country from north to south and offers public health with universal access and quality, because health in Brazil is a right. And with this, however, the pandemic situation for SUS brings the sad view on corruption and the neoliberal ideas that grow within this Brazilian public health. Thus, on the other hand, the impact of COVID-19 show how clear the social inequality in Brazil is, affecting more the Black population, and at the moment, also the indigenous people, with more than 800 dead indigenous people and over 100, more than 100 indigenous ethnic groups affected by COVID-19 in Brazil. And these numbers, it's a very serious situation for us now and to the future about this population, about these numbers, and our culture and history in a few years. So this situation for us is a very sad and warning situation in Brazil. The next, thank you. So I present for you this to you Djamila Ribeiro to end this presentation. Djamila Ribeiro is a Black woman, a Brazilian woman, philosopher, feminist, and writer, and she brings for us 5 proposals to her book called Anti-Racist Manual to reflect on the importance of decolonization ideas. So the first point by this manual says, one of them, one, search for information about racism. So for me, spaces like these webinars, it's a great to start this discussion with other people. And the second point, she says, see the reality of racism to get people out of invisibility of the social condition. This point is a very, very important point. To understand the 3 point, recognize the privileges of whites. At this point, she reviews the concept of place of speech to remind us that whiteness also has its social place, and this place is a place of privilege in a society like Brazil based on racism. The 4 point, it's important to understand that our Brazilian society was built on racism and sexism, and unfortunately, our language is racist and oppressive, and we need to recognize the internal racism in us to do more and to do different about this discussion and this topic in your country and around the world. And the last point, she says, read Black authors. In Brazil, some examples are Djamila Ribeiro, Carolina Maria de Jesus, Lázaro Ramos, Sueli Carneiro. Some examples from Brazil to empowerment this population, and this point is a very important point to the difference inside this topic. So we have a great path of change within our culture and country to do more on this debating and fight against this racism that kills and discriminates against more than 100 million Brazilians. So to finalize, I bring a phrase by Sueli Carneiro. Yes, thank you, Caio. Sueli Carneiro, that could be better to understand our struggle and debate in Brazil and in America's on racism. She says, racism is a system of domination exploitation, and exclusion that requires the systematic resistance of the groups oppressed by it. And political organization is essential for this confrontation. So there is a fight, and to do different, and this is possible. This is my opinion about this topic on racism, and I really exciting to know more about the other visions around the world with the Ethiopia and India. And I hope that you enjoy this presentation from Brazil. So thank you so much for this. And for more information, to for more information about the name Brazil, you can follow us on Instagram or send us email for the name Brazil with Z. So that's it. Thank you so much, Caio.
I was muted. So I want to thank you everyone to are here today with us. I think that me and Victoria we were trying to bring here today a little bit about the view in, in racism in Brazil. So thank you so much to be here today with us. And the next is Purva, and she will bring a view about the India situation in racism. So I want to call Purva to join us, please.
So just a kind reminder, I don't know if the forms to questions will be able for you guys. So the questions will be accepted only in English. If you have some questions about Brazil, you can send, but now we can start with India and Ethiopia. So enjoy this place for your questions. And I don't know, but Iago was fallen.
We are we are having so much troubles with the this. So just a minute, and we'll try to fix it. So, Purva, the floor is yours. You can do your presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here today with us. We are very happy to receive you on this space.
Thank you so much, Kayo, and thanks so much, Victoria. I think the presentation in Brazil has also expanded a little of my own understanding of how racism is perceived in different parts of the world. And I could immediately find a lot of similarities between the issues we're facing in our countries. And before I begin, I will just introduce myself. So I'm Poorvaprabha Patil. I'm a final year medical student based in India. I was born and brought up in India. And I study medicine here. I also am the current president of the Medical Students Association of India, which is the Indian NMO for IFMSA. And I'm also an incoming student for a master's in public health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And I've been very passionate about gender equity, racism, and the confluence of health and poverty, and all of these issues meeting together. Which is why this webinar is a special one for me, because it really it's something that I identify with. So that's a little bit about myself, and I also have a disclaimer. I have tried to put in as much information as possible in my presentation, but at the same time, I would like to mention that there are so many dimensions to racism, especially in India. Now, as much as I've tried to cover everything, if I have missed anything, or if you have any specific questions, I would be very happy to take them. But my idea for this presentation is to give everybody an introduction of how race affects India, and what are the different forms of racism that I see in, or I encounter in my country. So with that, I will also start sharing my screen. Okay, I hope my screen is visible.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
So, yeah, perfect. I can start.
We are just seeing the screen of StreamYard. We are not seeing our presentation.
That's strange. Just give me 1 second. Is it visible now?
Not yet. Oh, now we can see.
Perfect. I'm breathing finally. So just to start off with, I will assume that not everybody would have an understanding of India per se, and those who have heard of India or have been to India, all of them have very different emotions and feelings. So the feeling I attach with India is the melting pot, because there's so many cultures, so many different languages, so many different people living together, and just so many people. We are over 1 billion people, which is why I like to call it a melting pot. And just to explain why I call it that, India has 1.4 billion people. They say every 1 in 7 people across the world is an Indian, which is strange yet funny. And then 19,500 plus languages. So the number of languages in itself is almost the size of a small city in a lot of countries. And people follow different faiths, different religions, Hinduism being one. There's Muslim populations in India, there's Christians, there's Sikhs, there's Buddhists, there's Jains. And with just 6 religions that I've mentioned, the top 6 in terms of population, but there are so many more within my country. And to give a little bit of a geopolitical perspective, India was under the British rule for 200 years. and we got our independence in 1947. And this historic significance is a little important, and you will find out in just a few minutes exactly why. And after getting our independence, after forcefully getting our independence, like a lot of other countries, in 1947, we had our first constitution adopted in 1949. And in 1950, our constitution finally came into force. And this is also very important because the Indian constitution does talk about equality and very specifically mentions race, very specifically mentions religion, and very also specifically mentions caste. And despite that, these issues still prevail very significantly and are very deep rooted within India, despite it being so many years since our independence and since the constitution being coming to existence. And now I know I'm using the map a lot, but I promise that this will also feed in somewhere towards in the latter part of my presentation, and you will know exactly why I've been showing this map so many times. So India is broadly divided in 4 parts geographically. There's the north, there's the west, there's south, and there's east. So I belong to the west, and now I study in the south. But the region that we would more be talking about is the east, and specifically the northeast. We have some North Indian states who have been facing racism and problems around race more than any other part of the country. Which is why this becomes slightly important to understand here. And given the size of the country, almost every state has its own cuisine, its own culture, and its own peculiarity. So if you're standing in the north, you will experience something very different than what you would if you were in the south. So if you don't know that this is the same country, you will probably also think that you're in 2 different worlds. It could sometimes be that different in terms of culture. So with that very brief introduction, I know there's so much more to talk about when it comes to India, and there's so much good to say, but for the sake of this presentation, I would like to focus on problems specifically around race and around multiculturality, and also a little bit about the caste system. And I call this flip sides of a coin because as much as we call ourselves a very welcoming country and a very multicultural country, a secular country, we do have problems like any other country in the world. And a lot of times as Indians, we also fail to very clearly see them because a lot of times these problems show up, are very subtle. It's very difficult to, just notice a lot of silent racism that happens in India. And that's what I'm wanting to talk to you about today. So in terms of problems, our first problem is our obsession with whiteness. And I've just put a picture of an advertisement here. And this is one of the 1 million advertisements even I, as a person, grew up seeing or grew up watching. And everybody around me always looked at fair skin or white skin as the standard of beauty. Like if you are wheatish or if you're slightly darker, you were somehow also automatically ugly. And this was fed into my brains, like so many other Indians, so deep that until I was 8 or 9 years old, I did not know the difference between dark and ugly. I thought they were the same words. That's how interchangeably they were used. And while I shared this personal reflection, I would also like to say that I come from a very small place. It's not even a full city; it's a town. So I kind of grew up in a developing environment where we were heading towards urbanization, but faced issues that even the most even the smallest villages in the country would see. And one of those problems were people's obsession with whiteness. And this advertisement and this picture is just an example of how this whole chain works in India. And looking back, this is just an assumption, and there is some scientific data on this, but largely it's acceptable to say that our obsession with whiteness in this country also probably comes from the British rule, because a lot of Indians looked at the British as goddesses and the standards of beauty. And that is very evident even years and decades after the British rule is over. Now, very specifically, how this reflects on to the current scenario is people with dark skin often have less job opportunities. And there's a lot of evidence on this. In interviews, you're more likely to be considered shabby in India if you have a dark complexion. And these are very subtle things that a lot of times you are subconsciously doing and not even realizing. While growing up, I had this dark friend, dark skin colored. She had dark skin and very prominent features, beautiful looking young girl. And I remember another friend coming to me while I was in school and telling me, "You shouldn't talk to her because she's black." And those things really leave a mark. And this is how this sort of an environment is an environment in which a lot of children in India grow, and that shows in the way we behave with diaspora of other populations from other parts of the world living in India. And another form rather of racism in India is the kind of racism the north people from the northeast face. So within the northeast, it's so common that when you look at somebody from the northeast, a lot of times even friends around you pass comments which are really alienating and affect you in more ways than one can imagine. And they're very subtle forms of racism, calling somebody a certain way or referring to somebody from the northeast as Chinese or Japanese is really just stealing their identity from them. And it's so common in India that it's almost sad that it continues to happen despite there being so much activity around it. And this is one form of racism that I think a lot of other countries also identify with in the neighboring Asian subcontinent, in the Indian subcontinent in general. And this has impacts on healthcare, for example. And even within the face of COVID-19, while we're in between a pandemic, this does not seem to stop. Very recently, there was also a news report of a woman spitting in the face of a 17-year-old person from the Northeast and calling them Corona, implying that they looked like they were Chinese. And these instances are really heart-wrenching a lot of times, but a lot of Indians also feel very disconnected from these issues, because if you are in let's say, an urban city in India, especially with students and the younger generation, uh, the activism around racism has changed a lot. And from like starting from the center, we've gone towards either having a very strong opinion against racism or being complicit or just complying to the different forms of racism that exist in India. And that is, I think, a pattern that more or less the whole globe is starting to see at this point. But broadly, coming back, these are the two main forms of racism that exist, and especially also with diaspora living within India. A lot of students from different parts of the world, from also a lot of African countries, come to India and often have terrible experiences. Given the fact that India is not a predominantly white country, if people often assume that racism probably isn't a very big issue in India. But just during the course of this 10-15 minute interaction that we're having, the three different forms already, which shows how deep rooted it is also in this country. But more importantly, I also want to discuss something that might be a little new to some people who are watching right now, and that is the caste system or casteism. I will just pause for 5 to 10 seconds for you to register those words. And if you have any thoughts around them, I want you to bring those on right now. All right. Moving further with the caste system or casteism, I often talk about it with racism, and a lot of times it feels like racism and casteism are the same thing. And I will leave it up to your interpretation after the end of my presentation for you to decide if you think they have a bearing on each other, if they're same or if they're different things, or how they potentially impact each other. But before we get into that, I'll just briefly put up a definition that I found of casteism, which really conveyed what it is in India. So in India, there's something we follow called the caste system, which is basically a system of defining class or assigning status to an individual from the time they're born. And it's mainly based on profession, and it has a historic importance more or less, because this does not necessarily hold true now, but this is how the caste system in India took shape, and is still more or less broadly divided the same way. So we have 4 classes within the caste system, and they're really called class, which in itself is a little discriminatory. So the first is the Brahmins, who were mainly, the religious torch bearers and engaged in priestly activities and were advisors to kings of that time. And they had a relatively high social status, if I may quote that. And then were the Shatrias. Now, the Shatrias were soldiers or people in the army, or warriors who fought wars in ancient India. And the Vaishyas were the traders. So people that engaged in agriculture, in business, in marine trading, and in textile, any sort of business you could think of came broadly under the class of Vaishyas. And the fourth were the Sudras. Now, Sudras, as Indian literature says, were people that engaged in engaged in services of domestic help or labor or manual labor, things like that. And these words I know seem probably as foreign as something can get, and please don't stress about not being able to read them or say them. These are Sanskrit words. And Sanskrit is an old, ancient Indian language. I wouldn't say Indian language, but yeah, it's kind of the holy language of the country. And most of our scriptures are in Sanskrit, which also explains why the castes were named in Sanskrit as well. And outside of this bracket, we also have in India, in ancient India, there was also the untouchables, and they were considered the lowest class in this caste system. And the atrocities that they've gone through is just something that even breaks my heart to say as a part of this presentation, because it almost feels unreal for such incidences to have happened within this country that I proudly belong to. And they, for example, just this specific class of people could not draw water or could not touch the water sources of people from higher castes, or they could not enter in areas where people from a higher caste lived. uh, or even today, as much as this seems like an ancient problem, there are so many news articles, there are so many news headlines every day about how somebody from the ancient lower class was beaten by people from the upper caste for drawing water from their source, or from going to the same temple as people from the upper caste. And a huge component of all of this is also marriages. Even today, you will see a lot of Indian households practice getting married in the same caste. So if you're a Kshatriya, it would be expected that you marry the same caste. If you're a Brahmin, it's expected that you marry the same caste. You marry within Brahmins. And as much as this is fading off a little bit, it's still very, very, very predominant in India. And this probably does not seem like that big a problem right now, but I'll also get to explaining what the significance of this system is to the Indian society. One that I floatingly mentioned is marriage. If you're uh, in after so many years, after almost being a modern country, at least in the urban sectors, it, the caste system still plays a major role in determining who you're getting married to. For example, if somebody from a historically lower caste wants to get married to an upper class partner, there are a lot of news coming in every day of murders being done based on this. People getting beaten, people having to escape or flee their cities, escape their hometowns just to marry the person they want to. And a lot of times the caste system is the only problem in this whole equation. Other than that, healthcare. There are also reports of certain medical professionals, certain health professionals, not giving certain people from lower caste the same treatment as they would to other patients. And this is also something we are trying to work on as an NMO, to make sure we have equality in the way, and any patient should be a patient for us, regardless of their caste, regardless of their religion. But as as it should be, it was not in India. Another problem is education. A lot of times you would see people from certain castes are marginalized within educational institutes, are marginalized within their friends circles, even within workspaces, or even within job opportunities. There are countless reports of caste playing a huge role. And this will also open up another conversation of reservations, which is also a concept that exists in India to fight casteism. But this just adds more complexity to it. Other than that, this brings in a lot of poverty, lack of educational opportunities, questionable job opportunities, leading on further to health problems, health related problems, because education, poverty are all determinants of health at the end of the day. And this is, just scratching the surface. And as medical students, this is something that I say a lot, repeatedly. As medical students, no matter what part of the world we are in, as long as we don't address the social issues of the patients we are serving, we're not really doing justice to them, because they are still going to go back to the same environment. They're still going to go back and live in the same society, which probably was harming their mental health or was harming even their physical health in a lot of such cases. So I've very broadly tried to sum up racism within the Northeast. Um, India's obsession with whiteness and also the caste system. And I know I've only scratched the surface with the presentation I've made, but I hope this gives you a little better understanding of um, the current scenario in India. And with that, you can also probably imagine how COVID-19 must be acting within this, because while everybody's social distancing, a lot of people engaging in manual labor, a lot of people engaging as domestic helps have lost their jobs. And casteism has become huge because the resources that exist in the country are limited. And COVID-19 makes you feel that way. And it's really brought to light how the society would shape with the caste system in a crisis. So, with that, I will want to conclude my presentation. But before going, there's one thought that I would like to quote. It's by Angela Davis, and it reads: in a racist society, it's not enough to be non racist, we must be anti racist. And that's something I stand by. If out of my presentation, if there was only one thing I would really like you to pick, it would be to understand the difference between being non-racist and being anti-racist and following anti-racism. It's not okay to be a good person, a non-racist good person. You're even as a good person, if you're not standing up against racism actively, you're failing to do your responsibility to the very society you live in. And that's just a strong belief that I stand by. And I hope this presentation has helped you a little further in understanding the situation in India. And I would also like to thank um, I would also like to thank Victoria to bring this opportunity and have this dialogue to really understand what the situation is like in other countries and how we as medical students chip into this picture and what we can do. And I think this initiative is in itself is an example of how we can get this conversation started, and how we can help our own communities and ourselves. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. It was amazing for me too. I hope that our medical students that enjoyed this presentation too. For me, was clarify so many types and topics about racism inside the India and some things about the culture and other things to more interesting for me and for Brazil. So thank you, Purva. The questions will be at the final this webinar, so we can go now to Ethiopia with Aemon. Um, Send your questions on the forms, and the questions only be accepted in English. So, Aemon, are you here with us? Welcome.
Yes, I am. So should I start sharing my slide or should I submit it to WhatsApp?
Yes, you can share your screen. So just a kind reminder for you guys. The link for forms to questions will be able on the chat in YouTube. And again, only in English, please. The questions will be shared with our um, guests at the final of this webinar. So enjoy it, Ethiopia. And so, Aemon, do you need some help?
I already tried to share it. I don't know if it's.
Okay. Yes, it's perfect for me.
Can you see
Just
me though?
yes, I see.
Okay. Can you see me?
Oh no, just your voice.
Okay. I apologize if my camera is not working.
Yes, no problem.
All right.
Yes, now it's perfect your presentation. You can go now.
Okay.
Okay.
Um. Uh. Am I audible now?
No, I can see you on video, but if you can go with your voice.
Okay. So just I'm sorry. I apologize, guys, that I'm not uh, visible, but uh, I'll try to make the presentation interesting. So just to introduce a basic background of myself, my name is Aemon Berhane, currently residing in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I am working as the developmental assistant for Africa for the term 2020 and 2021 within IFMSA. I contribute my works majorly towards major global health initiatives and mostly focused on global surgery as well as gender equity and any injustice with regards to inequality. So I'm very delighted to be here today with you guys, as this is a very close topic, close to heart topic to me. And I also want to convey my thanks to Victoria for inviting me to this meeting to be able to give you a brief explanation of what our views are towards racism and the struggle within the African perspective. So thank you, Victoria. Can I go on?
Yes, you can go.
All right. So, based on the history, as the majority of you know, uh, colonization and slavery were the pre-formation of racism within the region. Uh, as pretty much depicted in this image, 90% of Africa was under European control. About 30%, uh, as you can see in the image, uh, had been colonized by the British and the French, followed by the German, Belgium, and Italy. I'm very happy to be part of a nation that has never been colonized, as you can see, as lightly colored as independent, because uh, I have an opportunity to view my region with regards to my neighbors suffering from the oppression and colonization, as well as have my perspective of being having grown up within a nation that has never been colonized. So it's a unique experience for me, as well as gave me a different perspective as I was not exposed to external racism whilst growing up, or have I heard of any oppression being made other than a couple of, a couple of wars within our histories and timelines that would suggest that there was an aggression towards us from an external foreign, environment. So, based on the map I showed you, it's pretty clear to see that this is not the current map of Africa. As you can see, we are much more divided, and we are much more classified to regions as well as countries in today's world. And when I move on to the next perspective, saying forms of racism experienced in Africa, in an African perspective, you can you can predict that they were caused due to, number one, as I mentioned before, colonization was one of the factors in that. When it ended, after decolonization, the effects were so prevalent enough that the countries that were liberated towards the end of decolonization suffer the most today within internal conflicts and internal racism. That goes to show that when colonization was done, people were suffering, or people were made to be colonized by the strategy of divide and conquer. So when you're trying to colonize a nation or an area, you would divide the people within that nation or area, so that you would conquer and rule them, pit them against each other, so that that would be an advantageous point of view, and the colonizer would be regarded as the peacekeeper as well as, the ruler. So when that ruler or peacekeeper, after making that conscious decision and disrupting the social circumstances, when they were leaving or being decolonized, the African nation was scrambling, and that they didn't know which border was which. They didn't know how to properly delineate which nation with what. And if you can see today as well, the region of Africa is not, the nations of Africa are not poorly demarcated based on ethnic groups or any other substantial uh, divisions that would lead a nation to be formed, but rather the older demarcations of slave trades, as well as gold mining projects that were left by, the maps that were left by the European colonies. So, as you could imagine, that would cause internal racism, as it would leave people with different opinions that were told different things within their own ethnic groups, so that they would have been easier to conquer. And that leaves a level of belief, which leads to xenophobia and fearing that part of the ethnic group, and that it would attack or be against my beliefs or my social standards. So the other form of racism experienced within African perspective is also derived from colonization, is that external racism that we face day to day. That is, after colonization, also after slavery, there were a lot of African diasporas or African descent people living outside of the region. As you could imagine, since their number is smaller, as well as since they are in a new environment at that time, they suffered a major oppression. So to this day, we face this external racism within terms of in cases such as the United States of America recent revolution with regards to racism within also the 1980s that you could see. And I'll also go deep down towards COVID-19 and its effect later down to my presentation, and how we face external racism as well. The other is institutional racism, also known as a systemic racism, is a form of racism that is embedded as a normal practice within society or an organization. This collaborates with external and internal racism, as the colonials left people with scrambling to figure out their identities after colonization, as well as uh, have were the ones giving out instructions. There were a part of groups or a particular number of people that were, made to have power in that time. So you could take the example of what happened in Rwanda, and one of our most, scariest time with regards to racism, and it's documented as one of the most need, traumatizing humanitarian act within the modern world. And that was due to one part of the ethnic group feeling superior because of his or that ethnic group's colonizer making them feel that way. So that sort of delineates that the other ethnic groups as, you know, not important, or normalizes the practice within that society to have an institutional racism. And you can also see it very, very clearly within the recent clashes between in the United States between African Americans and the Justice Department. As you could see, how institutional racism put there during slavery still affects the modern world with regards to people from the African descent. So the sorts of racism others include within the nation or within the region includes family. If a family is teaching the older methods of thinking in which one race is superior to the other, or one ethnic group betrayed this ethnic group, still that information being passed on, not actually educating the family when bringing up that every race is equal and everyone has the right to every equal opportunities as well as the right to life. This is one of the source of racism that is still affecting the African region because of the lack of the families being developed in the right way, which is directly correlated to education. One of the most important pillars that we face in any types of humanitarian crisis is education. And with regards to racism, as I said, if people were educated enough and if people within our region had the equal access to education as the other Western countries could have done, we would honestly be on the right track. And this is one of the sources of racism that we face in the region. And social groups. These are groups that were led to believe, as I mentioned, those were superior. Also, those people or those ethnic groups that have, vengeance against one ethnic group because of a past incident, or an ongoing conflict with regards to land or geographical, dissertation. The other one is project groups. This could be political parties that are using the ethnic diversities in order to gain power, utilizing what was taught by the colonizers, in which divide and conquer within the region. Especially in my case, you can see that peop Ethiopia was never colonized, but you can also see that the current ways of politics also are derived from colonizers, in which you tend to pit one ethnic group against the other and trying to come to power, as they've seen it being done and successful within the recent past. Uh, the other one is media. As you can imagine, this is one of the most important and crucial source of racism. With regards, you could see the close history of Rwanda, which the radio station majorly announced that incident to happen, which resulted in millions in dying just because of that, radio program, and making people believe in a certain way, utilizing that. And we see it today with regards to Facebook, uh, especially within the African region, people utilizing Facebook, having ghost accounts in order to propagate propagandas about political parties or other ethnic groups, in which it would regard these people to have conflicts with other people. So racism in Africa, I would classify it to two in order to make it more clear from my perspective. With regards to foreigners and from other regions, people from other regions, our region is especially different in which we are the most viewed to be burdened of racism acts. So when it comes to us and other foreign people coming to us, in recent views of COVID-19, we've had problems, which I will continue to mention in other slides, but we have not seen that many aggression and that many racist clashes because of foreigners coming, or we haven't experienced locals being, racist towards other foreigners coming within our nation. There are some, there are some name callings, but not as harmful as a person being affected physically, but there are some mental aspects in which a foreigner would uh, be affected with slight racist comments or institutional uh, practices that would affect foreigners. But the major thing that I can potentially point out is the the unique experience within South Africa, in which there are a bunch of foreigners which were mostly we faced that during the early 1980s, in which we've seen apartheid happening, in which foreigners were the clashes happened between the two apartheid uh, people, in which it resulted in uh, having the foreigners as well as the locals suffer humanitarian loss. Uh, and we still see it today in some aspects, such as South Africa, in which foreigners suffer that, as well as the local suffers from foreigners coming into the region. With regards to xenophobia and the direct effect of ethnic groups being affected with one another, is the same thing that I explained. Because of those political indifferences, the footprint left by colonizers in trying to colonize the region, as well as some geographical disputes, we have experienced internal racism, in which I would begin to cover in the next slide. So uh, when I come to the impact of COVID-19 with regards to health of people within African descent, as we've seen in every part of the world, COVID-19 does aggravate a long-standing structural inequality in terms of access to healthcare facilities, goods, and services, in which that COVID-19 only exacerbates society's ongoing problems we faced without the pandemic itself. And it would also result in uh, us facing those same problems, but in a heightened manner. So, with regards to health, that we've seen is that, number one, talking about, as I go through my slides, I would also like to continue the part that I classified them into two, internal and external aspects. When considering external aspects, we've seen that people with African descent have less health coverage than other people of other nationalities. So we've seen in a study conducted in the US, 19% of African American mothers were likely to die during labor more than the average Caucasian. And that wasn't, that could be, you could argue in saying that that could be as a result of a much more broader, a broader reason. But another study backing that study was, if and when an African American doctor was in charge of managing that patient, they would have a significant decrease, about 90 to 80% decrease in women surviving that chance, as well as neonatal survival of African American people. This goes to show, this is a study done within the US, which is a good study that can highlight other regions and other countries that are still affecting, people from the African descent with regards to healthcare and access to healthcare. Within the region itself, you can see that it's already burdened with a majority of the diseases within the world, suffers a lot with regards to access to safe healthcare, as well as access to many health care facilities and services that would otherwise be available in other parts of the region. And when you add COVID-19 on top of that, it would strongly stimulate, the ongoing tensions between the parts that I mentioned, the ongoing tensions within nations, and the ethnic disparities within each nation. It would only enhance them and makes peacekeeping as well as anti-racist movements uh, suffer a lot, because people are at a more sensitive or are a more exacerbated stage with regards to racism or ethnic disparities or xenophobia within the region. So lack of healthcare facilities, goods, and services, we've seen that Africa has been affected, not as bad as we have thought of, but racism has been increased or in, heightened due to COVID-19 within the region. And we've seen that uh, we have started to suffer more conflicts and more tensions in which people, for example, if I manage to take my country as an example, after the COVID-19 outbreak, and with regards to not being able to elect a new government or have a new election, we've seen that there was raised tension between ethnic groups. The talks were getting more and more abusive with regards to one another because of the postponement of that election process. And that resulted in having a, a huge amount of clashes within the months of from April to September. So this, I see it happening within other African regions as well, increasing the already ongoing tensions within each nation's problems. With regards to internal conflicts, I see a major, with regards to foreigners coming to the region and experiencing racism because of COVID-19. Again, I'll take my country as an example and my NMO's work, EMSA Ethiopia's work, with regards to how we managed to deal with it and what we've suffered because of it. Number one is that because of the second pillar I mentioned, the lack of education with regards to racism, everyone was aware that COVID-19 outbreak was first seen in the region of China, within the country of China and within the Asian region. So we we have a lot of diasporas from from China as well as other Asian countries, and we started to experience people locally first trying to you know distance themselves from people that were from that descent or from that area. But then when things were exaggerated and exacerbating, as well as when things started to scale, when deaths were starting to be recorded, physical sorts of abuse were documented as well, in which foreign nationals from that area would be attacked. But this was quickly ended by wide scale projects letting people know how the disease is transmitted and what actually causes death with that disease, and how race doesn't have any consideration with regards to COVID-19, and how it affects people and how equally it affects every one of us. And we experienced a small problems with that area, but our NMO, as well as the government, uh, poured in their hard work in order to provide quality education and do good advocacy work with regards to racial discrimination related to COVID-19. So that was experienced widespread within the region, and that also we've seen that that's one of the effects our region has faced. When we talk about the African diaspora having problems due to COVID-19 with access to healthcare, we can also use the example as to what happened within China itself. And uh, we have seen that university students being discriminated upon because of their African descent, uh, with the thinking that uh, there were spikes within the African population, and that they would bring back the disease towards China. And we've seen this happening and reported in many countries as well. But majorly, we've seen that in China, African students who are international students studying there, as well as other countries, have been, discriminatory against offering healthcare towards them, as well as much more discrimination to go beyond in saying you cannot access certain restaurants or go into some transportation systems as well, which was heartbreaking. And also, I have seen or I have observed good work being done in order to educate people as to how this act of discrimination was not correct or appropriate. With regards to law enforcement and administration of justice during the pandemic, uh, as I mentioned, if things were in a state that which you could take America for United States of America as a perfect example, in which they suffered a major incident within the early 90s, in which there were disputes between the law enforcement as well as the African American communities. And with the added pressure of COVID-19, we've only observed that it makes things much more worse. And as we've seen, the Black Lives Matter movement clearly dissertates that police brutality and people's lack of access to work, as well as being discriminated, only got heightened as COVID-19 was progressing within their nation. And we see this in many places as well. Currently, we've seen that when people are more or less in a more heightened or a more sensitive place with regards to other external factors, it tends to increase the amount of tension that is already ongoing. And you can see it in SARS movement within Nigeria, which is really heartbreaking as well, in which the law enforcement is acting, uh, as the superior, as the superior part of the society, in which it would enforce its laws, as well as do uncertain and unjust actions towards their citizen. And we've seen this majorly spiking due to COVID-19, because the societies are under more tension, and this results in much ongoing tensions becoming more exaggerated. How has COVID-19 affected equal access to education, which is really important with regards to the African region? Because you can by analyzing the region's development, as well as by knowing how nations are trying to provide educations within the region, you can already know that uh, our region, specifically Africa, suffers majorly with regards to education because of COVID-19. As more and more Western countries were shifting towards online platforms, as well as other modes of education, the entire region was put on halt with lack of access to quality internet, as well as trying to provide a quality education to everyone equally was an impossible task. And this only shows that the the level of underdevelopment of the region, COVID-19 can only make it worse, as I mentioned. So, as with regards to education, we've seen a huge suffering towards the region, and this again is resultant into racism coming into the picture, in which certain ethnic groups were given privilege within our region, and other ethnic groups were disowned or not having access that quality education. So this is a very bad circle in itself, in which the lack of good and quality education would result into you know the cause effect of racism, as well as because of racism and the colonial effects, and because of the region being underdeveloped, it's causing lack of education within times of pandemic in COVID-19, as we see now, and within the future as well. It's almost certain that we would face this again if certain good actions are not being taken. So with this, I know I haven't clearly given you a good picture. I tried to mention in which how COVID-19 and racism are affecting the region itself. How our history is prevalent towards what we face in race, because our region is specifically unique, in which it faced so much racist acts and violences before and after colonization. We see this after effects, the aftermath, and I've tried to clearly outline that cause and effect relationship between that, and also the relation between COVID-19 and how we're currently suffering due to the pandemic with regards to racism. Uh, I would love to have a very a broader discussion with anyone that would like to talk about this issue specifically, and I hope I made it justice to explain to everyone a tiny brief of concept about how the struggle and debate is about racism within our region, within Africa, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions in a detailed manner, as well as if you want to contact me, I'll leave my details with your NMO president so that we will be able to discuss. Again, I would like to say thank you very much. Thank you, Poorva. I really enjoyed your presentation as well, and seeing that aspect from an Indian perspective was also amazing. Thank you again, Victoria, and uh, uh, I'm very happy to have been part of this discussion. With this, I end my presentation and hand over the floor to Victoria again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Aemon was perfect this presentation. Really enjoyed this time with very important informations about Africa and situation of COVID-19. Very well contextualization. And thank you so much for your time and your attention to do this presentation for DENEM Brazil and for our medical students here. Was amazing. Thank you, Poorva, to your time and your attention too. So now, the final, at the final of this webinar, we'll share with you guys some questions that were sent by our medical students. And I think that these questions will be able to you guys on the chat of the StreamYard before here this YouTube. So it's okay for you guys. Any questions? Okay, Poorva. Okay, Aemon. Okay, nice. So the first question is for everyone. I think that we can share this on the video. I don't know, Iago. So the first question for everyone is, doesn't your country have an anti-racist law like Brazil? Poorva, you can go.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, so if I were to answer this directly, we do not have a specific law that talks about racism. We do have broader laws that talk about discrimination, and that could be discrimination on the basis of religion, discrimination on the basis of caste, but not very specifically directed towards anti-racism. But we do have provisions in our constitution. So if we were to look at this from a legal standpoint, a lot of times you could go back and find justifications on particular matters from a lens of equality, but not directly from a lens of anti-racism. Yeah, that's just to keep it short.
You can go, Aemon. The same question for you.
Thank you. Yes, as I mentioned, we faced majorly ethnic problems that would. I know the United Nations doesn't exactly, mention the differences between ethnic differences and racism. Uh, it almost considered it as the same, but we haven't faced, as I said, as much as external racism because of not being colonized, as I said. And but with regards to internal conflicts and ethnic disparities, we have certain laws in place. Uh, Especially if I remember correctly, in recent years, within the last 10 years, we've had a lot of proclamations with regards to ethnic violences that would result in major consequences to that ethnic group as well. Uh, is my concern is that how well is it enforced is a question in itself, because we've seen time and time again, because of COVID-19 and how uh, heightened things are, those laws are more or less said, not done, and they're not enforced properly. But we do, yes, we do have anti-racist laws within our constitution. Yes.
Thank you so much. Please, the next question is for Aemon, Ethiopia. Ethiopia has not been colonized. Sorry. How does this differ from other countries in Africa? You can go.
Yes, thank you very much. As I mentioned, it's a very unique experience to say, because the lack of not being colonized, we have never felt as though external racism exists. And this differs a lot, because when a lot of diasporas from our countries, or a lot of migrants from our countries, go into nations such as the United States, which consequently suffers a lot of racist acts, are surprised by it. We suffer a more of an incidental view towards racism. I wasn't exposed as other African regions have been exposed towards racism, and it only becomes oblivion, or it only becomes overt when people from my nation migrate to outside countries, as well as uh, in times such as, in a globalized time such as this, that we absorb every information from an online perspective, and we tend to have that mentality in which this exists, and we are predominantly that type of race, which is consequently severing that type of act. And we're starting to educate ourselves, as well as we also, funny enough, have a much coloristic approach within Ethiopia itself, and we haven't been casted as one colonized nation, so we tend to see much more internal conflicts happening with regards to political gain, not in terms of colored or not colored type of differences. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So the next question is for Poorva, India. How can you define the caste system?
That's actually quite a nice question, because with how complex the caste system is, it's almost madness to find one definition of what it could be. But um, in papers we have right now and in resources that talk extensively about the caste system, they define the caste system as a form of social stratification, in case of India, characterized by heredity and an individual's profession. But that would be like the textbook definition of a caste system. How would I define the caste system? Would simply be an ancient system we could do much better without the existence of. So yeah, that would be my personal definition of the caste system.
Thank you so much. The fourth question, please. Next one is for everyone. It's a good question. Thank you for this. Assuming we will have a vaccine effective against SARS-CoV-2 in 2021, how do you believe that racism can affect immunization programs in your respective countries? So now you can go, Aemon, and the next Poorva.
Yeah, excellent question. This is something we're going to face in the recent future. And with regards to the region, we've seen talks already happening. For example, I'm pretty sure that you're familiar with the French journalists and scientists mentioning that using the African communities as test population as to immunization and how the outcome is going to be. And you can already see how the world views the region and that descent as to being the last on the list, as well as being the first to be tried upon. So, assuming that we would have a vaccine by 2021, I would predict an immense suffering from my region. But since many of the brilliant political leaders, as well as the union, is working towards collaboration with other governments and trying to have a very stable laws of distribution, I am very hopeful that in terms of suffering, we would also have opportunities to be able to be stronger and make our immunization systems as well as stronger with related to other diseases as well. So, can how do you believe that racism can affect immunization programs in your respective countries positively? But I would also suspect a suffering prior to that with regards to equal distribution also. Thank you.
I think for India also the situation would be very similar in terms of what part of the vaccine process gets affected. In India too, most of it would be related to access to this vaccine, and more I think more so it will be a confluence of racism and casteism that will cause this sort of a barrier or this sort of an impact. And it's not only limited to immunization for COVID-19, but it's also a lot to do with just how accessible or inaccessible, for that matter, healthcare has been to these populations within the COVID-19 pandemic, be it for testing, be it for just transport from one place to the health facility, or be it treatment within the health facility. Though the treatment in the health facility bit is not as big a problem as it could be, I wouldn't say it's absent altogether too. So I think it would be but natural for me to imagine that this problem will also um, stay or kind of extend or extrapolate to the vaccine accessibility, if not be more than the access to healthcare facilities at large that India is seeing a problem with.
Thank you so much. Was a great question to our perspectives. The final questions, I don't know. Yes, the 5 questions for everyone. He says, how is the debating on racism within your universities? You can go, Purva, and the next, Aemon.
Thanks so much. And that's also a very nice question because it leads to a little bit of self-reflection too. And I would say the debate on racism within universities, I think I can talk better for medical colleges and health science universities. It's pathetic, if that's the word I could use, because there's barely any conversation happening around racism or around casteism. These issues are more or less looked at as, issues that could lead to potential rifts or conflicts. And somehow my generation in particular, I think, has found a way of just entirely canceling this conversation. Even when I bring this up with my friends, it's very coincidental that I was having this conversation with somebody just 5 hours back in the evening, and somebody made a racist remark in my friend circle, and I quickly just jumped on it. And I was met with a response saying, you just take things too seriously all the time. And then when I really got more serious about it, I did feel very strong attempts of the conversation trying to be pushed back. And that is exactly the attitude people have within universities, because at least some side has to be a little pushy for this conversation to come in. It's either the administration, which does not want to do anything with racism at large and casteism as well, or the students, who also seem to be more or less in a conflict until there's like a specific group that's very highly motivated. But having said that, I also want to mention that the situation is not here to stay for very long. And anybody who's watching this video right now, it's also our responsibility, um, our inherent responsibility, if I must say, to bring this to the conversation if it's not right now. So it's pathetic, but I'm hopeful and optimistic that it only has to go upward from here.
You can go, Aemon.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for this question as well. As Prova mentioned, it's pretty self-reflecting question. Within terms of majorly within the context of Ethiopia, as I've mentioned, since majorly the racist violences we've experienced are due to political power grabs, they are more or less heightened during elections. And we've seen in a previous election within the Ethiopian calendar, I think it was in the 1990s, but in the European calendar, about like in the early 2000s, we've seen these debates were happening within universities, and students were majorly the voice of political parties, and they, especially universities, because the people were as of age to vote, the political parties were using the students to be able to inflict their outcomes. So we've seen clashes happen between students, the quality of education being dragged, as well as major life consequences happening during the conflicts towards elections. So now, unfortunately, we are not openly talking about racism or the entire topic of race, because it's directly correlated to political parties within the context of Ethiopia, and it's actually illegal to have a well versed discussion about racism within university. And universities actually ban any religious or political talks, and every racism or like racist geared topic is directly associated with political parties. So there is unfortunately nothing we can do about it. The most discussions happen on social medias, and those are not, positive or like fruitful discussions, more or less an abusive sort of an experience. So I would say it's a very bad aspect within Ethiopia, and hopefully something we can move forward from.
Okay, thank you so much for your explanation. It was amazing. I hope that everyone enjoyed these webinars on racism. This our second webinar and the last one. So I hope that everyone that enjoyed this space and the questions and these responses. And for now, if you have any final words to say now, it's open for you guys. And after you can, sorry, I forgot the name, but it's open the space for final words if you want to say something.
I think for my closing remarks or any final words, I know I've spoken a lot on very, very different thematics and different areas. And I've tried on emphasizing our role as health professionals. But for closing this, I would say in any conversation you are where people question your opinions or your views on racism, because somebody tells you that health professionals should not have strong views about political issues, please discard it right away. Health is a political issue. Everything to do with health, every social determinant of health is a political issue, and so is racism. And it's only when we understand these problems better and we try to find these solutions against racism and against casteism with the people we're serving that we're going to be really capable doctors, doing exactly what we set out to. There's no health until there's social injustice. And our responsibility as medical students and doctors and future health professionals does not end at the door of our hospital consultation room, but goes far beyond that. And I just want you to remember that in everything you do. Thank you. And thanks so much for this opportunity to even speak and put my thoughts forward, and also hear from Aemon and Kayo and Victoria. It's been a learning experience for me at the same time as well.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to start by saying that this is an amazing platform. DENEM, you guys are doing amazing. Keep up the good work. You guys are an inspiration. Purva, as always, thank you so much for your aspects of thinking, and you're an amazing person. I'll just put it at that. With regards to my last words towards racism and the conversation that needs to be had, as I've mentioned, if you are in an opportunity to discuss these types of issue openly in a safe environment, please do so and educate yourself in any way that you can, because there are countries such as mine that you're not as allowed to do that, and take part of that, take advantage of that opportunity, please. When it comes to health and our responsibilities as medical students, IFMSA teaches us the responsibility on our shoulder not only goes within our certain area or local communities, but what we do local and where we affect a local change, it has a direct impact on the globe. That's the whole entirety of saying think global, act local. So no matter what you're doing and no matter what type of conversation that you guys are having within your local communities, it's having a direct impact within the world. So don't just disregard it as my conversation or this type of discussion would only affect, this person or this small scale community, but it has a very direct impact towards the globe as well. So as medical students, I feel like we're in a very privileged state to share our views, and we are involved, as Purva mentioned, everything affects health, and health affects everything. So if we voice our opinions as youth towards human rights and equal opportunities everywhere around the world, especially towards racism and how every ethnic background and every person from the world needs to be equally treated, our voice is going to be in heightened unison, and we're going to have a one voice, and we're going to impact the world by acting locally in a bigger scale. So thank you very much. As I've mentioned, it was my pleasure to be able to share some tiny bits uh, of my knowledge with regards to COVID and racism, and I would like to do this again anytime that you guys want to. I'm always available. Thank you very much.
So that's it. I am so happy with this space. Thank you so much for your time and attention. We went here, this webinar, and the last one webinar about racism. Thank you so much for your presence. The medical students, thank you so much too. Thank you, Iago, for support us on this webinar here inside StreamYard. Juliana, Monique, Caio, thank you so much for organization. And the last, Aemon and Poorva, again, thank you so much. I had so many, my heart's bigger now, okay? Thank you so much. We end here.
A DENEM é de quê?
De luta!
E a DENEM é de quê?
De luta!
A DENEM é de quê?
De luta!